that I like the cloud. Jen and Pete are big fans of athletic brewing
Oh
as
my
well.
God, Brandon, I love your background. I feel like that's the perfect background for this discussion generally because to me, burnout is epitomized by the like sitting in flames, drinking your coffee, pretending everything's cool when it's very much not cool.
It's just my 2020 Zoom background in general.
It's brilliant and I love it.
Yeah, cool. Well, yeah, it's Monday, so we're gonna do a longer, um, a longer topic this
Yeah.
week. We were
Instead
thinking,
of waiting for you guys to submit questions, we hijack the conversation to talk about what we feel is important and relevant.
yeah, given that I think 2020 has been, and we're finally kind of coming to a close and going to be soon entering 2021, but 2020 has been a really tough year for everybody.
Actually, I was looking at, and it was the first ever blog post on the Microcosm blog that we sent out of like at the same time last year. And it was just like, yeah, get excited for 2020, sign up for all the races, dream
Yes.
big, go all in, like, propose to your partner, like, do it, 2020 is the year. Now, like, looking back, I'm like, oh, such a different, like, I
I
was writing
know.
it in a donut shop that's now closed, in public, maskless. It was such a different time.
I know. Now we're here behind a computer screen speaking
Yeah.
virtually.
Yeah. And now I'm
Who would
like,
have
I don't
thought?
know. Maybe I'll race someday.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Well, today we're going to talk about burnout and probably through the lenses of balance and a little bit about when it's appropriate to reframe stress and push and when it's appropriate to respect what you're feeling, either the physical or mental signs of burnout, those symptoms and sensations, and when we need to rest. I guess this is a really relevant topic as we go into the holidays. Holidays can be stressful for people. I think even more so we saw during the time of Thanksgiving. Also, I think with 2020 having been a year where a lot of people haven't been able to race as much, that means we've been training a heck of a lot more. Probably haven't been taking as many rest days as we need to, or we pushed through some mental or physical stresses that may leave us at the end of the year a bit tired. Um, I know for a lot of the athletes I coach, I've been incorporating about 10 or 14-day off seasons for everybody, kind of as a mandatory, let's rest, let's pump the brakes a little bit. Let's make sure we reset both physically and mentally and emotionally. So that way, when we go and engage in our activity that we love running, for most everybody on this call, like we're doing that from a kind of a fresh starting point. Um, but we want to get into
Yeah, I think
what
just to
all this
piggyback
means.
off
Yeah.
that slightly is that your first and biggest line of defense against burnout is taking intentional rest. And that's one of the big reasons that we don't do makeup miles and that we take rest days so seriously because rest days are that chance for you to spend a day just like not caring about running or, caring in a way like foam rolling, like whatever it is. But it's so important for you to create physical and mental, emotional distance between you and the sport that we all really, really love. And you have to do it on purpose. Like, don't wait until you feel tired or get burned out to rest. Rest in advance so that you don't burn out. And that's why we don't do makeup miles. Like, just because we like the universe is going to let you run a certain amount of miles is kind of how I feel, and you don't need to like back things up and like try to add things on the back end because that can kind of lead to this feeling of like accumulating stress.
Let's
And we want to run less rather than like always be finding a way to run more, because the best training is the least amount of training you can do while still provoking positive adaptations. The best training is never the highest volume you can withstand without breaking.
Why don't we start by kind of talking about what burnout is and how that
Yeah.
manifests?
So there's two kinds of burnout. There can be physical burnout and mental and emotional burnout. And I think what's really important to stress up top is those are both equally important. Like, just because something is like mental emotional burnout, that doesn't make it any less real. And we need to treat physical burnout and mental burnout with the same amount of care, caution, and seriousness. So signs and symptoms of burnout, in a training context can be like long periods of low or no motivation, serious physical or mental exhaustion, decreased performance, sport devaluation, and like the most extreme version is when people just quit. And that's something that like we've seen is people like will train really, really hard for their goal race, and since they'll have been kind of overextending the whole time, they get to the finish line and they're like, I don't actually want to run again. And that's like, as coaches and people who are just passionate about running, that's so hard to see. Like, we just want to prevent people from having to like end things poorly with running.
I think it's important to also note that you might feel these things in your day jobs too, in your profession, your careers. You can feel this stuff in your relationships and any number of things that you spend a lot of time and energy on developing, maintaining, and improving. Typically, people really see this stuff in stuff that they love and that they're passionate about.
I think one of the biggest manifestations of this I've encountered during the pandemic is one of my favorite writers for The New Yorker, Helen Rosner. She's their lead food critic and like lead kitchen critic. She wrote this piece about how she was just like, she lives and breathes food. And during the pandemic, when she has to like, is the sole food provider for her family, she just like, she had this tweet that went viral because she was like, I never want to eat again. Like, I just can't do it anymore. I never want to see food again. And that to me is like what burnout is when the thing that you love, that you've oriented your entire life around, you're like, screw it, I'm just doing protein shakes from here on out because I can't like julienne another carrot.
Yeah, and the other thing that I think is important to recognize is sometimes the physical and mental kind of signs or symptoms of burnout exist independently of each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so you might be going out and training and be feeling great, but mentally you feel terrible. Perhaps you're really exhausted. Perhaps you're having trouble motivating to get out there. So you're forcing yourself to get out the door and do your run every day. And although you're performing great, you're easy runs are still around the same average pace when, you go and look back at your splits afterwards, or you're still making around the same times on, that neighborhood loop that you like to do. But mentally, it's a lot harder for you to go out there and do those things. It's the same as you can have a ton of motivation and just physically not feel great. I think at least for me, sometimes this is like when I really get my easy pace really gets easy, when it goes from, low 7-minute miles to like mid 8:30-minute miles. And every day I'm just running 8:30s and I'm like, I probably need a break. So, sometimes the two things, it can be hard to understand and differentiate. I think a lot of people think about burnout through the lens of it being much more mental than physical, but sometimes it really can be purely physical.
Yeah, and I think it's also
differentiate.
important to stress once again that just because it's mental, that doesn't make it not real. Like, you can't muscle your way out of that, right? Like, this is the point where like there's a difference between having a little bit of low motivation or a case of the I don't feel like it's, and then burnout, which is like you have reached the end of your rope, you've like burned the candle like a little too hot, and there is no other option but to rest. And a lot of times, particularly with very motivated athletes, that's where we see people struggle the most, because like maybe, physically they feel like they can keep going, and so they're going to the detriment of either their mental health, emotional well-being, or their ability to continue to engage positively in the sport that they love.
Yeah, and it's a lot of athletes who are high achieving, and people, you can think about this in the context of your careers and things like that too. It's hard
It is
to accept.
primarily high achievers that experience this.
I mean, it's really hard to accept downtime as a necessary it's not necessarily a cure-all, but it's an important step in reestablishing kind of a healthy relationship with that thing that you love and enjoy and you're doing, but isn't feeling that good for you. I think that at least for athletes that I am working with, it really starts by like, and maybe trying to even get in front of that burnout. It starts with at least 3 days off. And using those 3 days off as like kind of a primer for that fourth day. And we'll try a run on that fourth day, and if it doesn't feel great, we're gonna do 7 or 10 days off. I think it's really important to not push it and to respect what you're hearing and what you're feeling in your body. And sometimes the feedback your coach is giving you, even if it's not what you want to hear, it's hard to accept that feedback sometimes. But it's really important to, and that's why you have somebody who's kind of in your court, letting you know, like, okay, I think typically if you've rested 3 days, you go out and you push that next run, you try the 10-minute rule, and it doesn't feel good, or you're still struggling to get out the door, it's a really good sign that you might need an extended off season. I think something that really helps everybody, especially in the context of 2020, is understanding that we have this kind of lower grade stress that
This
just
chronic
exists all the
underlying
time.
stress.
Yeah, and it makes us a lot more susceptible to the fact that burnout is likely. It also puts a lot of pressure on each athlete to use the outlet of running as this sole space for mental and emotional kind of rejuvenation from other areas of life that might be difficult, like uncertainty in your job, or uncertainty with the health of family members or the health of your community, what being able to be social, and all of these things that have been really affected this year. So kind of when that level is a bit higher and we're all feeling that, whether or not that's normal now for us to feel, that doesn't really, it still exists, so we can't write that off. I think the other piece to that is the fact that many people aren't racing a lot, so there's not as much incorporated downtime into planning and training. So I think one thing that, if you work with me, you see every fourth or fifth week is a significant down week in training volume, and that is designed not only to help your bodies physically to respond better and to recover from the work that you're doing, but also it's a good emotional check as well, because when we decrease the amount of time we're spending out there, that is less time you're having to focus mentally on the task at hand, the training, the workout, the easy miles, the hills, etc. So taking that extra space can be really helpful, and including that in the plan is, that's why we do these things, to help you guys to avoid kind of these circumstances where you have like decreased performance, or this exhaustion that doesn't go away, and low motivation. I think it's one that I kind of a symptom of burnout that's really interesting to me is sport devaluation. Um, what does that mean? To me, that means that you're not prioritizing your running anymore, or you're not prioritizing how much emphasis you put in something that you're doing at work. When you devalue something, that means it's not as high a priority anymore. And when you've had big goals, say you ran 100 miles, or you did a bunch of races and you accomplished some really cool and exciting things, and you were thinking about doing them again, and when you pushed for them, it got hard mentally and or physically or both, and you decided to pull back, switch those goals, that is sometimes a sign that you're devaluing the importance of those goals and what they meant to you. And that is kind of a side effect of the burnout. It makes training really difficult from a long-term perspective when you're devaluing what you do. And that can be a natural byproduct of the burnout. And another sign that you guys should pay attention to is if you're starting to not prioritize your runs as much, that might mean that you need a little bit of a break.
Yeah. I think something that is so interesting about burnout is that it very much affects people who are super dialed in terms of what their why is. Like, having a why can't necessarily protect you from burnout. Like, whether you run for your community or you run for like to be a better person, like whatever your why is, like a lot of people that experience burnout have like a really strong source of motivation, and it's their pursuit of that thing. When it's unchecked, that's what leads to burnout. So like, you can be like totally in the right place and have like these amazing guidelines and like this like amazing underlying purpose for your athletic pursuits, but if you don't take prophylactic measures like rest days and just like trying to build empty space around your practice, then that's kind of when you can start to head towards these like more negative outcomes. I think about this particularly because my two jobs are coaching runners and writing for runners. So like so much, like every inch of my day is taken up by like running, running, running. And then like
And
what do
also
I
your
what do I
training.
do to take a break from that is I like go on a run, right? So like I have to be so protective of my own mental space and like really try to actively pursue like reading things that are totally irrelevant to my job and to my coaching, like try to like have conversations with TJ that have nothing to do with our business and with coaching or with running generally or like training or athletics. And just like really try to open up more empty spaces to grow into, which can be really hard and uncomfortable because like I love running, I'm super passionate about it, but I'm also like one of the people who's most burned to or like most prone to burnout because I'm just like always charging at the things I'm excited about, like headlong with like minimal check on that passion. And so I think that like the biggest thing we can do to kind of investigate our likelihood of burning out is just like what are the checks you have on your passion, like what accountability do you have for taking breaks, what accountability do you have for setting space aside to pursue other things. And I think one of the cool things about being coaches is that more times than not we're not telling people they need to like run more, train harder, read more, be more serious. We're like, hey, lighten up, like, you know,
Don't
maybe
overthink
don't
it.
obsess about stuff today. Don't overthink it. Like, take some time to like. I'm seeing James, and he's an amazing violinist. Play the violin, or check out James's violin videos online. Like,
That's awesome.
do cool stuff.
Hell
Like,
yeah.
do stuff that is irrelevant to your athletic career and your athletic pursuit. Same, and like all this advice goes for like whatever your job is. Like, I coach so many amazing people who are just kicking butt in their day jobs, and I always want to encourage them to like set aside space to like do fun goofy things that have nothing to do with your achievements at work. And I think that is so so important.
Yeah. What are some like causes of burnout other than kind of what you might just have mentioned, which to me kind of was a really great way of describing that the way you identify yourself is very connected in one specific area, and that might be something that causes you burnout. I think that there's some other things that may cause burnout as well. Poor nutrition over time,
Sleep is the
lack of
biggest one for
sleep
me.
over time, um, pushing and forcing runs too often over time when respecting the lack of motivation sometimes can be really
Yeah, and
important.
I think that's the hardest thing is like understanding, do I just kind of not feel like it, or is my body sending me a signal that like there are times when being an athlete your first line of defense is your body being like, I kind of don't feel like running, and it's not because I'm not motivated, it's because like I'm lacking some really important resource like sleep or food or something else, right? And I think, and this is something that as coaches we cannot make the decision for you, and you have to get very comfortable making the decision for yourself and functioning autonomously as an athlete. Is, am I not running today because I don't feel like it, or is my body sending me a very honest signal that I should rest today? And that is hard. It is just hard.
Yeah, it is. It really is tough. And that's why, everybody who works with us for at least a year, because within that time, you will begin to build awareness around what you're doing, your signs of burnout, when it's appropriate to push and when it's not. That comes through experience. That comes through having feedback from either of us or one of our other coaches. That also comes from you articulating some of the things that you feel in the training log just for you, not necessarily for your coach, but just for you, in order for you to look back at that and have something to reference. It's quite common that athletes tend to, who are really beginning and just starting out, who have very demanding careers, home life, family life, it's really common that those athletes tend not push when they're not feeling motivated. I see that a lot. I think that sometimes there is a line where you need to get yourself out the door when you're not feeling
Yeah,
like
and I think
it.
that that's like why I call it a case of the I didn't feel like
Yeah.
it, because you like totally could run but you just didn't, or like didn't make time for it, and that's different than like and I think every athlete has had the experience of their body is honestly trying to communicate, and it feels different for everyone and everyone's body, but something about you is trying to tell you like we should rest today. It's like for me, I know if I get like, because I'm more likely to err on the side of pushing too hard, I have to really honestly pay attention to that signal. And if like any part of me doesn't feel like running, I'm like, oh man, this is a freaking red flag from my like endocrine system or something that I need to take a day on the couch. And it's different for every athlete. And you have to just be really honest with yourself and learn to navigate these things. Like if I'm someone who's more prone to like choosing rest more easily, then like I need to have this discussion with myself and negotiate this a little bit longer. Is it because I just don't feel like it? Or can I tell that there's like a root cause, like lack of sleep, lack of proper fuel and nutrition? Like I've been pushing too hard, I skipped a rest day, something like that. Like, is there an underlying cause for why I feel this way, or do I just not feel like it?
I think it's good to note that when we do decide that we want to go out when we're not feeling motivated, and we're reframing stress and trying to use it in a positive way to elicit growth, that we think about things in that 3-day context. So when we're feeling like acutely burned out or lacking in motivation, and your coach suggests, okay, like we're going to rest for 3 days. And on the 4th day, you're going to go out and run and give it that 10-minute rule and see how it feels. I think that 3-day rule also applies in situations where you're kind of having that, like, I don't really feel like it. If you have 3 days in a row where you're not really feeling like it, take that 4th day as a rest day. And then decide on the 5th day, for example, you rest Tuesday, you rest Wednesday and Thursday, Friday, rest day, short run, starting with the 10-minute rule on Saturday. And I don't know if many people who listen to these calls know we talk about the 10-minute rule a lot. It's where we take the first 10 minutes of the run without judgment. We try to get out there and just do 10 minutes and see how it feels. And when we get to the end of that 10 minutes, if we think we can do 10 minutes more, we'll do it. But if we feel like garbage, it's okay to go home.
Yeah. Or not just like garbage, but like when you get to the point where you're like, I can tell that this is like
not productive,
counterproductive.
Yeah.
The way that our coach very playfully words it as like, if you spend 3 days not living up to the Lizzo, I feel good as hell standard, then you take 3 days off. Like if you have 3 days in a row where you don't feel pretty dang good, then you need to take some intentional time off to get back to that place of embodying a Lizzo lyric.
The point of that, like kind of looking at things in that way is to break the cycle.
And also it's that you're the most productive training happens when you feel good. You should feel good in training. That doesn't mean you're not going to feel a little bit tired or like you're going to feel some stuff, but you should feel good. If you feel crappy all the time, then your training will not be productive. And the most productive thing for you to do would be to investigate patterns of sleep, nutrition, other things like that, underlying kind of like environmental factors that might be contributing to like why you don't feel good as hell on the majority of your runs.
Yeah, I would agree. That quality over quantity is so important. It's something that I see with a lot of athletes who kind of are maybe just getting into running or have only been working with the coach for maybe 6 months or a year. They get kind of that window of miles where they can run the lower end or they can run the higher end of miles. A lot more experienced athletes, they don't get the luxury of choosing between 2 or 4 miles. They get 4 miles because the adaptation doesn't happen for them at 2 miles anymore. It only happens at 4 miles or more. So, when we're looking at that and we have our window of miles, no, it's okay to do 2. And if 2 is what felt great for you that day, do it. But don't always default to 2 because sometimes we do need to stress ourselves a little bit in order to improve and to get better. I think that idea of balance is something that we definitely talked about a little bit in the Q&A on Friday and really relates to burnout. If we spend too many days stressing, and we continue to stress and push ourselves, and I guess I'm using stress in terms of like training, and we do not take the proper rest for the demands of what we're doing, we are going to get in a position where we're going to begin to start to burn out. lose motivation. It's very difficult to do that week and week and week in a row, month and month and month on top of each other. And the whole point of being consistent is trying to find a little bit of a balance in there where you are pushing yourself to the point of growth, you're resting appropriately, given the demands of what you're doing. And that includes training, that includes your responsibilities as a mom or a dad in your home and with your career and with your kids. All of those things have to be accounted for as a whole. And then you have to rest for all of that, not just the training. That's how you're going to avoid, I guess we can start to think about preventing burnout now, because I just mentioned it, but that is a way in which you're going to be able to maintain balance and keep working sustainably so you can continue to grow over time. I think that's something that is really important, giving yourself some grace when you feel like I really could use this extra rest to promote the quality of the miles later.
The heuristic I use definitely in my training, and I'm embodying a lot more in my career and like also in my partnership, isn't what is the thing I can do to be the most perfect in the moment now. It's what can I do today to ensure that I have longevity 5 years from now. So in my training, if resting today will allow me to run stronger 5 years from now, then I'm going to rest. In my career, like instead of going all out every single day and trying to like approach every day as a writer, like I'm tempoing everything I write, like it's all out nonstop, like trying to go like all out. That's not super, like while it might be productive for one day or 1 week, it is unsustainable. Should I try to be the most perfect partner right now in the moment, or should I make the choice that allows me to be like a better partner 5 years from now? So trying to think about like how what you're doing now will give you longevity in the thing that you care about, rather than just running headlong with like unchecked passion towards what you care about this second, I think can be a really helpful kind of like mind trick when approaching this issue.
Another thing that I think is really important, and this is all about long-term mental, kind of avoiding the mental side of burnout, is reducing your dependence on the numbers.
Numbers.
So,
man,
yes.
I feel like the biggest changes I've made in my athletic career are sleeping more and caring less about numbers.
Right.
Like those are the two things. Eating more. 3 things: food, no numbers, more sleep.
Big percentages training talk that we did a couple weeks ago. You guys should listen to that if you haven't.
Which is like crazy, because I feel like every article that you read on the internet is like, pay more attention to this random number, or like, get all in on this supplement. No, just like eat more food, sleep more, and like turn your watch off.
So some things that I see.
Don't get one of those pods that analyzes your cadence or some shit. You do not need that. Like, don't do that. And if your watch tells you you're we're going to do a Q&A about this, but like if your watch tells you you're detraining or like you're not in peak fitness, it has no idea what it's talking about, because it is a watch. Just like
I won't comment
PSA.
on the fact that you use a Whoop now, which I think
I use
is
it to
too much
track
data.
my sleep. I'm like, I aggressively track my sleep now.
Too much tracking.
One of my athletes, Lance, was like, we should start a Microcosm like group. And I was like, oh yeah. And I was researching it. I was like, I'm going to sleep all these people into the ground. And then I'm like, nope, you're getting too competitive. You need to like not make sleep a competitive thing. But like, I really wanted to.
Don't do it. Yeah, I think, okay. Whoop says you never sleep enough.
That's true. I've gotten
honestly,
100% of sleep once. I'm always pretty well recovered, because like I sleep a good bit. Like I'm pretty good at recovery, but
we've
like
seen some pretty bad numbers on the Whoop recently.
I've seen
some
mine are usually pretty okay, but it tells me I need to sleep like 10 hours a night, and I just like I truly do not have time. I wish I could.
I think we slept 10 hours last night.
I think we might have slept 10 hours last night, but like every single night.
We're striving for it, at least 8 hours.
Maybe we'll start a leaderboard. Let's see if anyone's into it.
I don't even like that our Strava club has a leaderboard, because I think it leads to over obsession over mileage and vert goals through the week, which is pretty unhelpful. We've said it before, so I'm going to say it again. Run with distance and time on your watch face.
No pace.
And nothing else.
Yeah.
No heart rate, no pace, no average split per mile, no vertical gain, no vertical speed, any of that. Just get rid of all of that noise and just run with distance and time. They're the only 2 metrics you need to know. And if you're really great at math, you can figure out your splits. But I would suggest don't even go there. Put a podcast, put some music, embrace and try to be present in the moment. when it comes to analyzing your workouts, a lot of athletes do not benefit from writing out every single split that they did on their intervals, every split for their strides,
Mentally,
every
that may
split
not
for
be
the hills.
super helpful
Yeah.
for you. And I will definitely say, as a coach, when I get excessive split data, what I like to see is a big gap between top end and easy pace. What I don't love to see is when people are like so attached to the numbers where I'm like, you would get your marathon PR tattooed on your lower back, wouldn't you? Like, that's where this is headed. That's what I don't want to see. That is excessive.
Because we don't want you guys to look week to week and sometimes in the same week and judge your hill stride splits or your stride splits, or even like in a speed kind of focus build, what you did on 1 minute intervals one week compared to the next, or 2 minute intervals one week compared to the next, because that stuff is going to change based on so many factors, like how you slept, how your eating's been, what your stress levels are like, how focused were you, how like mentally, and how much mental and emotional bandwidth did you have going into the workout, where in the training block are you? Is it the first workout of the training block when you're freshest, or the fourth when you're the most tired? All of those things contribute to the numbers. And if you get trapped in thinking about the numbers, you're going to think you're regressing, but you're naturally going to go slower at your easy pace. You're going to go slower in your workouts, and your numbers are going to be slower the farther along you get in a build, because you're accumulating fatigue. The point of that fatigue is to force you to adapt through the rest that you do after those workouts. So it's really important that you de-emphasize the numbers, emphasize your effort level. So if it's like 1 or 2 minute strides, we're thinking about those like moderately hard efforts. We're really pushing ourselves. We're feeling pretty tired after each one. Great. If that's how you felt, you nailed it. I don't need to know if you went 10, 6:10 or 6:15. Like that doesn't matter as much as if you hit the prescribed effort, because if you hit the prescribed effort on all four of those workouts,
right? Like
exactly.
You could have scored amazing data points or like amazing numbers and could have totally undermined the intent of the workout. Like if you went too hard or not hard enough or like did something weird, like we can't tell from the numbers what's actually going on. We can tell from like how you feel, which sounds totally crazy and unscientific, but it is a much more accurate representation of what's happening in your training.
And it's also really important that you don't overemphasize it, because if you get down on yourself for having slower overall splits on your workout in week 4 than you did in week 1, it's going to be really hard to say like, okay, this is why I'm feeling bad about it. Well, it's the 4th workout, and so I should be tired, and those numbers should be a little bit, slower. That was what would normally happen. But our brains don't always work that way. And sometimes we overemphasize those numbers, get down on ourselves.
And not just the numbers, but like...
Hold on. When we continue to get down on ourselves, that's when mentally and emotionally we begin to lose bandwidth and start to push towards that burnout that we want to prevent.
Yeah, I think focus on outcomes, whether it's data or race results or like recognition at work, like whatever it is, focus on those things rather than just the process, and like taking care of yourself is what tends to lead to burnout, because it's a mismatch of the effort you're putting in and the results that come out. And like there's always going to be a mismatch. Life is weird. Training is like only marginally predictable. Like sometimes you're going to train super hard and have a bad race. It just happens. And if you overemphasize the outcome, whether it's a workout, race, day at work, like whatever it is, overemphasizing that is what leads to the burnout. And you need to emphasize the process. And the process consists of trying super hard every day and then resting when it feels good. And I think that it's, if you're able to just kind of detach from like putting too much pressure on single days or workouts or like numbers or like some sort of external validation, and put a lot more emphasis on like running is great and generally feels pretty okay. That's awesome. People who have that approach tend to stay engaged in the process a lot longer.
Yeah, I think that that's so good. Some other things that I think are really important, respecting your rest days and using them as a day to not think about training, not think about running, taking that space to do other activities like you mentioned earlier in the call. And I think that translates to not going into your training log and writing about your rest day in there. That's something that I started with my coach. I would always write on my rest day. And then as I evolved, 4 years later, I never write on my rest day because that means I'm engaging in running, and 90% of my life is running related. So when I can take those moments to not think about running, it benefits my burnout. And it keeps me in a place where, like, mentally and emotionally, I have more bandwidth. So that way I can really emphasize in the log with my coach when I need to. And I don't spend a lot of time putting things in that aren't critical, or on my rest day when I should really be resting. So respecting that rest. I think what goes along with that is the boundary settings there. So if you're not feeling great, don't feel pressured if a friend goes and tells you, let's go do a big run or a big mission. Respect where you're at. Listen to your body, respect that, set your boundaries. Another thing that's really important is how you schedule and think about racing. Are we doing race after race after race and kind of leapfrogging or lily padding our way across a year of running? Or are we opening ourselves up for space for growth and emphasizing
the
a
good
few
news
races?
of 2020 is the very few lily pad approach athletes I did have had to like do a total reality check and be like, okay, yep, training is awesome and racing all the time is not productive.
Yeah, it's hard. Be smart about when you set your goals. If you have a question, always ask your coach. Racing too close to another race or not respecting the downtime that a specific event requires can lead to burnout.
Yeah, if a goal takes so much out of you that by the time you complete it, you hate running and never want to train again, then it was not a good goal.
That's very true as well. And with that, use different races to lead up to your biggest races. So that way your first race isn't the biggest race you've ever done in your life.
If your first race is a 100 miler, it's going to be real hard. I don't know what else to say about that. But or if it's a 200 miler, don't do that. Ill-advised. Please throw in a 50K. Just
we want to think because we want to think about this as cultivating your passion, cultivating the thing that you love. The way to do that is to not go all in. The way to do that is little bits.
If running a 200-mile race is going to make you hate running, then don't run a 200-mile race. Do what's going to keep you in the game longer, because that's when the good stuff happens. Whatever goal allows you to keep setting more ambitious goals, 10 years from now, that is the best goal. None of us are going to achieve our athletic potential this year, which is simultaneously frightening and super liberating. That this year is just a drop in the bucket of what we're going to do. And so if you put all of your intention and activity on one single goal, one 200 miler, one 100 miler, half marathon, whatever it is, we just tend to see this a lot more with longer distance races, then you are undercutting your own potential.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Don't be afraid to do less.
Yeah, doing less is the best. It's the best. Oh my God. I wish someone had been just 5 years ago, come down from on high and been here's the secret, say no to things.
Yeah, it's hard to set those boundaries. I think it's appropriate sometimes also to make sure that the training that your coach is giving you is appropriate with where you're at mentally and physically. Our job is to push you in a way that allows you to grow.
Less is more if you do it better.
Right. But of course, when we're trying to grow, sometimes you need to do more miles, but often that mileage you may not feel that it's appropriate. So asking questions is a really great way of kind of trying to find the balance there. I can think of several situations with in my own training where I didn't feel like I was getting the appropriate mileage prescription from my coach based on the other the external stresses I had in my life. And that required, an email and a short conversation through email over that to find a better balance. Because it's not the most that you can do, it's the least you can do while still provoking growth. And sometimes when we're doing the most and we have these external stresses, that's where we burn out, we get an injury, something that we really think could be preventable had we maybe taken a step back and a deep breath and looked at things objectively, and then, sent that email, or asked a friend who has advice or expertise or whatever.
Yeah. In ways that, like, so burnout, big, scary, don't run 200-mile races if you're not hugely passionate about it. Some other like really pretty easy ways I think of preventing workout are just finding ways to make running fun again. Like for me, it's putting on a very goofy playlist, and like also making sure, like particularly during very cold winter months, that I'm always appropriately like bundled up so that I don't feel any sense of like temperature dread when I'm going outside, and making running fun and comfortable and easy. Another thing I think that will inspire burnout is people think they need to run their runs faster than they do. Making sure that you continually revalidate with yourself that like the best pace that you can go on a given day is chill as possible. Like if you ever feel like you need to start racing your workouts or racing your runs, that kind of pressure is one of the like stimulants that can lead to burnout. So like taking that pressure off and just like re-evaluating the mindset you're going into with runs and workouts. Like, if you only have to shuffle a run, that takes a lot of mental pressure off. If you get to listen to a fun workout or like a fun playlist or a fun podcast, like all of those things can help make it a little bit more fun. I'd love to know like what kind of mental tricks you play to help re-engage, like re-find your sense of play in training as well.
Yeah, I mean,
New routes or
this is really relevant for me because I've been dealing with a lot of burnout over the last month. And I think that something for me that's really helped is not listening to podcasts at all when I run. I find that lately it's been too mentally engaging when I just want to run. So listening to music has been big, and recognizing that listening to music that I like rather than something that is mentally engaging allows me to feel better when I get to mile 8 and I need to go to mile 10 in order to get, in order to continue to improve as a runner. 8 doesn't do it, 10 does it. It's been hard for me lately to do 10. So having the right music has really helped. I think also the time and space for meditation has been really helpful mentally and emotionally, and knowing kind of where my limitations are as a coach and an athlete mentally and emotionally, and trying to better set my boundaries so I don't finish every day feeling completely drained. I think that's huge. It's real, having the boundaries and setting yourself up for success, knowing and taking the time to kind of evaluate your experiences in the past, and knowing what has worked for you, and then knowing like what isn't as successful, and kind of dropping that.
Yeah, I think, for sure, just to be super vulnerable, one of the reasons we instituted like Zoe and TJ aren't in the logs on Saturday is because we were starting to cope with some super real burnout. Like especially TJ was trying to race, I was dealing with a really hard injury, and it just became entirely too much. And even just taking a small step back, as in instituting one like mandatory day off for ourselves and like holding each other accountable to that, was huge, right? And like there's lots of, whether it's doing that at work, like maybe figuring out a way to incorporate some more structured rest into your parenting or family life schedule, into your training schedule. You already have it because you have a rest day built in. So that's amazing. Take that and like run with that, but don't run on it. And like just be really intentional about your rest, and figure out what your boundaries are, and accept that they're going to be different than other people's. Like TJ and I have very different bandwidths in terms of like approaching burnout. His physically is super different than mine mentally, emotionally, very different than his. And that's awesome because we are totally different people, and we approach things differently, and we're able to support each other to make up the gaps.
Yeah, I think that's important. As always, when we're talking about mental health and things like that, having supportive partners or supportive groups really kind of help to curb some of those symptoms, I think, and being able to just openly discuss whatever you're feeling with a loved one or a trusted friend can be really, really important.
Because there's no shame in burnout. Like we've seen time and time again, burnout is typically something associated with some of our highest achievers, whether it's in their career or their training. Like that's something that people that try really, really hard encounter and then feel shame around, because they're like, well, I'm usually so motivated and driven. Why do I not feel this way? I guess I'm just going to keep pushing until I totally explode. And that is not the approach we want you to take. If you start to feel these things, we want you to talk about it with us, with your partners, with your family, like with whoever you have access to talk to, because this is a real thing. And the more we destigmatize it and start to have open and honest conversations about it, the more we can learn about it and all grow together. And just like understand that other people's ability to negotiate these things is just always going to be different. And that's totally cool.
Yeah, I think it can take a long time to understand what burnout is, I think even for
and it looks different for
us,
everyone.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Sometimes I won't know I've reached burnout until I've zoomed way past it, right?
Working 7 days a week for 2 years straight. Yeah. You might get burned out.
Yeah.
That might happen. Not respecting rest enough. The mental emotional side of it, that's what gets me the most.
I think a lot of it comes back to like figuring out what the things are that fill your cup. And that's just going to be different for everyone, but getting curious about what those things are for yourself can be huge. Like for me, things that I think of that make me able to like have 2 jobs that are intimately tied up with running and trail running are like cooking. Love cooking because it's something that feels like I don't cook from a nutritionist perspective. I cook from a I love food perspective, and that's a really freeing space. TJ is a jazz musician, and he jazzes from a jazz musician perspective, and it's like very different than his identity as a coach or an athlete or whatever it is, or a skier. And being able to like fully inhabit these different identities give us space away from the thing that can fill us up on occasion, but can also be a huge emotional and mental draw on others. Like, even though I spend a lot of my time writing, I also deeply love reading because it's something I can do that like adds to my mental and emotional resources, but doesn't pull on them in the same way that writing does.
Right, when you set the proper boundaries, because if you are constantly reading something that is related to running, coaching, trail,
exactly.
Then that can tap you out.
I mean, we've had to be really like, even on Saturdays, we'll start to get into like complicated coaching discussions, and one of us will have to be like, actually, let's save this for later so that we can like just have a day where we talk about like literally anything else. And I think that being able to have those conversations and be honest with people around you, and also asking for help, is so huge. I feel like it's the biggest life hack I've ever learned, is that you absolutely don't have to do everything. And if you don't want to do it, you can just ask other people. There is no merit badge for doing stuff on your own. If you are able, you should always reach out for help. Like, ask your coach for help designing a better training schedule. Talk to your supervisors or coworkers at work when what you're given exceeds your bandwidth. And like, know these things never feel good. I don't live them. I struggle with it all the time. But the more you're able to more honestly assess your abilities, what you can take on, and then what's available to you, the better you'll be able to do those things, and the less burnt out you'll feel.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think it's taken...
Ask for help. It does not make you weak. It makes you smart.
I think that's been critical for us throughout, starting a really successful business and also having other interests, including athletic lives that are kind of interconnected and tangled and get all blurry and all of this stuff, that it's hard. And without other people's feedback who have gone through similar things or who are really knowledgeable, it can be hard to get a good grasp on exactly what might be going on and like what the best course of action or way forward is. I think in those moments where you keep plugging away on something over and over and without having stepped back or asked for help, that's really when you can get yourself into some pretty serious trouble. And this is like all about cultivating your love and your passion, especially when we're talking about running or other hobbies. And I would encourage you guys who are into other stuff, set that time out for those things, because it's really, really healthy to have other interests. Your life can't be only running. If all of your mental and emotional energy is put into your work and your running, you're setting yourself up for really tough challenges in the future, because
you'll get hurt or you'll have to take a down week, and then you'll just feel like you're spiraling.
Right. And that's that. Okay, I'll say one more thing before we maybe think about wrapping this up. When we talk about respecting boundaries and rest, the down weeks that we have in running or down weeks that you have at your job where things aren't as stressful,
don't try to fill the gaps with things.
Yes.
Let there just be gaps. Gaps are
Enjoy
huge.
That. Enjoy that break.
Just like stare at a wall. It is so good for you.
Right.
You even have to meditate, because sometimes meditation feels like a weird way that I trick myself into being more productive. But staring at a wall, I'm like, this is great. I'm really present with this wall.
No, you don't have to be productive in those moments at all. You can literally watch Game of Thrones like we've been doing to try to like chill
Almost
out.
done with season 8.
Yeah.
It's been a real wild ride. I feel like I'm
Oh my
experiencing
God.
life 10 years delayed. Because, like, I remember when Game of Thrones ended and, like, everyone on the internet went berserk, but I kind of don't remember what they were talking about. So I was like, whatever, you guys don't even actually understand fantasy, nerds. And now I'm, like, reliving it and I'm super into it.
Yeah, man, embracing the space, whether it's in your training, at work, or wherever it may be. There's just so much stigma around being productive all the time. You
Just
don't you
be
don't have to be
intentionally
productive all the time.
unproductive. Actually, just one recommendation I will send everyone with is one of my favorite books from the past like 5 years has been Jenny Odell's How to Do Nothing, which is like
It's
a
amazing.
manifesto
Amazing book.
against productivity. Um, it's amazing. It's like engaging in nothingness as like active resistance against the attention economy. And I think it's been hugely transformative for me in understanding that so much of the stress that I feel to be productive like is not beneficial to me. It is beneficial to like nameless, faceless people I will never meet, and it actually makes me less able to have meaningful connections with people I care about, like my partner or my athletes or whatever. And makes me spend like more meaningless time on social media, just like filling gaps in my life, because I've been basically like inculcated since birth to believe that any moment that I'm just staring at a wall is a bad moment, when in fact bird watching or staring at a wall is like some of the best ways you can spend your time, very honestly, because it's restorative in ways that we're really only beginning to understand.
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit about that restoration process in the last call on Friday, and it's
And
just so
also
important.
making sure that you're not just restoring so that you're like, oh yeah, I want to rest so that I can be more productive. Just rest for the sake of rest because it's good and doesn't need to be justified.
Yes, take your vacations for the sake of vacations. You don't have to post about it on Instagram. You can take breaks from computers, breaks from phones. That is so important. Gosh, I've had to recommend that to a couple athletes lately who just took a day off of electronics and came back feeling just so much happier and better. And I found that to be like really profound. I know sometimes it's a little bit easier in summer. You know, you can take yourself out, go camping for a weekend, engage in some like really cool adventures and not feel the need to post about it on Instagram, or not feel the need to like check in right away on your log, which puts you on the computer, which gets you to like check Strava and like to do these like cascading things of events where all of a sudden you're on the computer for an hour. You know, sometimes taking that full break can be like so refreshing.
Yeah.
And I like the fact that you rest not for the purpose of necessarily being more productive later, because it's that productivity that can sometimes lead to the burnout, but we rest just for the sake of resting.
Yeah.
We embrace vacation just for the sake of vacation, and all of the other things. Gosh, so important. Oh yeah, How Not to Do Nothing. Great book.
How to Do Nothing.
No, I thought. Oh, is that what it is?
Oh yeah, How to Do
Okay.
Nothing.
How to Do Nothing. How not to do nothing.
She's actually she's one of my favorite artists. She was the artist in residence at the San Francisco dump, and so a lot of her argument actually has these amazing kind of like socio-political environmental perspectives around how we can de-incentivize paying attention to systems in order to give our attention to things that actually matter, rather than like what the algorithm tells us should matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that really relates well to our talk about a little bit on social media.
And like how to avoid burnout.
Friday. Yeah. Well, cool. Well, thanks, guys. I think we've kind of exhausted our points on this. Do you feel pretty good about it?
I do.
Okay.
Do nothing. Do less.
Do less when
Best
you need
coaches
to.
ever.
Rest, embrace it.
Don't run. Don't think about running. Microcosm.
Don't forget about consistency.
Yeah.
In a healthy way.
Yeah.
Cool.
Intentionally don't run so that you can run more later.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. We have a Q&A coming up on Friday, and we're going to cover a lot of topics, and
who knows what they are? I don't.
We don't know yet.
We have no
we'll
idea.
Prepare soon, though, and it'll be awesome.
Yeah.
So, yeah, thank you. If you have any questions that you want us to cover between now and our next call will be Friday and Monday. Then we're going to take a break for a few weeks and come back after New Year's. So if you've got any questions for Friday or next Monday or after the New Year, please email us. We'd really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys are amazing.
All right. Thanks, guys. Have a good night. Bye.